In 1989, construction workers digging behind a government building in the middle of Tokyo broke into a pit packed with human bones. At least 35 dead, stacked together in the dark under the city, skulls with holes drilled straight through them, bones sawed clean in half. This was no ancient burial site. The cutting was done around the Second World War by trained hands that knew exactly what they were doing. The investigation was opened, and then it was closed, without a single name. Who those people were, and why nobody was ever charged, that is the bottom of this iceberg. And I will be straight with you, I almost cut it. I walked away from that research twice, and I have covered murder tunnels and plague islands on this channel without flinching. So this is the shape of the video, 7 levels. Level 1 is a woman in a surgical mask. You will smile at level 1, but every level down, less of it is story. And by level 4, the legends are gone and everything has a case file. The deeper we go, the worse it gets. And I mean that as a warning, not as a sales pitch. Most people who clicked will not reach the bottom. Find out where you stop. Let's begin. Level 1, the surface. These are the stories every kid in Japan grows up knowing, the ones you are supposed to be able to laugh off. I know you came for the bottom. Trust me on the route. Because even up here, where nothing is real, one of these stories once put real police patrols on real streets. It starts with a woman under a street light, wearing a surgical mask. Nothing unusual, half the country wears one in flu season. She stops you and asks, "Am I beautiful?" Say no, and the story says she kills you where you stand. Say yes, and she pulls the mask down. The mouth behind it has been cut open from ear to ear. Then she asks again, "How about now?" There is no good answer. This is Kuchisake onna, the slit-mouthed woman. And look, I grew up on stories like this. Every country has one. She is not why I am here. She opens this iceberg because of what she did to the real world. In the winter of 1978, a version of the story left one school in Gifu Prefecture. By the spring of 1979, it had crossed the entire country. And I need you to hold one thing in mind here. There was no internet. Children carried her, mouth to mouth. Parents formed walking groups. Schools sent out warnings. Police increased patrols, hunting a woman who did not exist. And in Himeji, officers arrested a real woman walking the streets in a mask, carrying a kitchen knife. That arrest is the part that stays with me. One grown woman heard the story and decided she wanted to be in it. The mask was never the scary part. One more from the surface, quickly, because this one comes with a sound. And I will be honest, this one never scared me as a story. It is what the story is made of. Teke teke. That is the noise of elbows hitting pavement. A schoolgirl who fell, or was pushed, under a train, cut in half at the waist, and did not stop. She drags her upper body after runners at impossible speed, and the ones who hear teke teke closing in behind them do not get away. File that one under recess talk, nothing more. But notice what it is actually about. Trains. Every Japanese child lives beside them, and every Japanese child has heard a station announcement about a delay that goes vague halfway through the sentence. The legends up here are not random. They grow exactly where the real fears are. And that is the last time on this iceberg that a story stays safely inside the schoolyard. Level 2 is where one of them grew teeth. Level 2, legends that cross the line. Everything on this level is still officially a story. The difference is that these two touch the real world. Once with a bookmark, once with a body. The next one starts as a pop-up. In the early 2000s, a flash animation went around Japanese message boards. You would be browsing and a window would open on its own. A black screen. A childlike voice asking one question. Do you like the red room? You could close the window. It would open again and again. And when it finally released you, the legend said, your name had been added to a list, and you would be found dead in a room painted red. The label on this one, chainmail with a soundtrack, built by teenagers to scare other teenagers, and it worked. Then came June 2004, in Sasasubo, in Nagasaki Prefecture, an 11-year-old girl killed her 12-year-old classmate inside their school. I am not going to describe how, and I am not going to use either name. They were children, both of them. When investigators went through the killer's computer, they found the Red Room animation sitting in her bookmarks. And that detail did what a detail like that always does. It went from a police report, to the newspapers, to every parent in the country, and for a while Japan was truly afraid of a cartoon pop-up, because the alternative was being afraid of an 11-year-old. What stays with me is the order of it. The legend predicted nothing. The pop-up killed nobody, but the story was standing right there when something real happened, and it has never washed off. The next stop on this level is a place I have taken you before. I did not tell you the whole story. There is a legend about a village in the mountains of Fukuoka called Inunaki. The story says the village appears on no map, that your phone dies at the boundary, and that a sign at the entrance reads, "The laws of Japan do not apply beyond this point." That village does not exist. Campfire architecture, built by teenagers on early internet forums. But the legend did not come from nowhere. It grew around a real place. The old Inunaki tunnel sits on an abandoned road through those mountains, sealed with concrete blocks, and regulars on this channel have been there with me before, on the forest list. What I left out of that video is the reason the seal exists in the collective memory at all. December 1988. 5 young men abduct a 20-year-old factory worker after a trivial argument. They beat him for hours. They force him into the tunnel. And then they burn him alive. He was 20 years old. I sat with the reporting on this one longer than I should have, and the word I cannot shake is trivial. He died over nothing at all. The men who did it were caught, tried, and convicted, and because most of them were minors, the sentences were light, and the oldest of them walked free years ago. He is a middle-aged man somewhere in Japan right now. The village legend attached itself to that sealed tunnel mouth afterward. The way skin closes over a wound. Hold on to that pattern, because it repeats the whole way down. Where something unbearable happened, Japan grows a legend on top of it. The legend is the scar tissue. Remember that. At the bottom of this iceberg, there is no legend covering anything. If this is the kind of Japan you came for, the version underneath the travel videos, take 1 second and subscribe, because this channel digs into exactly one thing, and you are watching it. Now, level 3, we go under the buildings. Level 3, the ground under the buildings. From here on, every entry has an address. High above a river gorge in Yamanashi, there is a place the locals named Oirenbuchi, the courtesan's pool. In the 1500s, this valley hid a secret silver mine belonging to the Taikeda clan, and when the clan collapsed in war, the mine had to disappear before its enemies could find it. Everyone who knew was a risk. The miners could fight, the women could not. So the 55 courtesans who had worked the mining camp were invited onto a wooden stage built out over the gorge to dance. And while they danced, the ropes were cut. 55 women went into the water. The silver stayed secret. And look, I went into this entry assuming that number was inflated. 55 is the number the valley itself insists on, and it has not budged in 400 years. No ledger records any of it, so take it as the valley's own testimony rather than a court record. But stand at that railing today and you will find the guardrail wrapped in prayer slips, and locals who will tell you, without smiling, that you do not stop your car on that stretch of road after dark. Whatever did happen above that river, the people who live beside it have never once treated it as fiction. And if you are keeping count, that is the scar tissue again, a story growing exactly where a wound should be. One entry further down on this level, the dead are not under the water, they are inside the walls. This next one is my favorite entry on the entire iceberg, and I am aware of how strange that is going to sound in about 90 seconds. There is a word in old Japanese construction that translates to human pillar, hitobashira. When a bridge kept washing out or a castle wall kept collapsing, the belief was that the river or the ground was angry, and that the structure needed a person inside it. Not a body, a living person, buried standing, sometimes walled in, so their spirit would hold the building up. The old chronicles describe it as something that was actually done. At Maruoka Castle, the story is painfully specific. A one-eyed widow named Oshizu was chosen for the foundation, and she agreed in exchange for one promise, that her son would be made a samurai. The castle went up, the wall held, the promise was never kept, and every spring when the rains flooded the moat, the town said the same quiet thing. These are Oshizu's tears. That is the sentence that got me, not the burial, the rain. Archaeologists still argue about hitobashira, and some burials under old structures were probably ceremonial, bones placed there after death. But more than once during renovations in the last century, workers opening the foundations of old bridges and castles have reported finding human remains upright in the fill. Make of that what you will. What sits beyond argument is the belief itself, held for centuries, that the most reliable building material in Japan was a person. Below this level, the folklore ends. Everything from here down has a case number. Level 4. Level 4. Cruelty with a broadcast license, and a poisoning the police chose to close instead of solve. I need to set this one up carefully, because it is the only entry on this iceberg that begins as comedy, and I promise you it does not end as comedy. In January 1998, a young comedian named Tomoaki Hamatsu, nicknamed Nasubi, the eggplant for his long face, won what he believed was an audition lottery for a television job. Producers led him to a tiny one-room apartment, told him to take off everything he owned, and gave him the premise. He would live there alone, with nothing, and survive only on what he could win from magazine sweepstakes, until his winnings totaled 1 million yen, about $8,000 at the time. So he filled out postcards, thousands and thousands of postcards. He ate whatever the mail brought, bags of rice, dog food at one point. He was naked for over a year, because clothing never arrived. And this is the part he did not know. The show, Susunu, Denpa Shonen, was broadcasting him to something like 17 million viewers a week, with a cartoon eggplant edited over his body, and later a live internet feed. He believed he was utterly alone, talking to himself in an empty room, and an entire country was watching him slowly come apart as a comedy segment. It ran for 15 months. And then one day they lead him out, blinking, holding a cushion against himself. He thinks it is another empty room. The wall lifts, lights, a studio audience screaming his name. 15 months of solitude ends in front of a live crowd, and he collapses on stage. I watched that reveal while writing this, and I could not finish the clip. There is a specific sound an audience makes when it is having fun, and hearing it aimed at that man is one of the ugliest things on this list. There were no consequences for the network. None at all. Japan moved on. Hamatsu, for the record, rebuilt his life, and years later he climbed Mount Everest, which tells you who was actually strong in that arrangement. The next case on this level got its ending. January 26, 1948. Tokyo is still a city of ruins and ration lines. Just before closing time, a man walks into the Teikoku Bank branch in Shinamachi wearing an official armband. He introduces himself as a doctor sent by the health authorities. There has been a dysentery outbreak in the neighborhood, he explains, and everyone in the branch needs to take a preventive medicine together because the timing matters. He demonstrates. First one liquid, then a second. 16 people drink on his instruction, politely, in unison, the way you drink whatever a doctor hands you. 12 of them die on the floor of the bank. The man collects about 180,000 yen, at the exchange rate of the day, roughly $500, leaves most of the money where it is, and walks out. 12 people, $500. Sit with that ratio for a second, because the police did. The poisoning was clean, professional, staged in 2 doses so nobody would taste it coming, and the investigators understood at once what that meant. Their first suspect list was not full of burglars. It was full of men with wartime training in precisely this kind of work, members of a military unit whose name I am saving for the bottom of this iceberg. And then, months later, they arrested a 56-year-old painter named Sadamichi Hirasawa. No poison was ever found on him, no witness identification that held up. A confession taken during interrogation, retracted almost immediately. He was sentenced to death in 1950. And then something very strange happened. For more than 3 decades, no justice minister would sign his execution order. Not one, across dozens of cabinets. He died in a prison hospital in 1987, 95 years old, still under sentence of death, never executed, never pardoned. I keep circling one thought here. A signature would have meant certainty, and certainty is the one thing nobody in that chain ever had. Level 5 is where that kind of failure stops being an accident. Level 5. The failures that were chosen. I went back and forth for days on whether this next case belonged in the video at all. It is here because cutting it felt like doing what everyone else did. In November 1988, in Ayase, on the northeastern edge of Tokyo, 4 teenage boys abducted a 17-year-old schoolgirl on her way home from her part-time job. They kept her in a house belonging to the parents of one of them. The parents were home, at times. Neighbors heard things at times. She was in that house for over 40 days. I am not going to walk you through those days. The trial record does that across hundreds of pages, and I read more of it than I should have. I will only tell you that when it was over, in January, the boys hid what they had done inside a drum filled with concrete, and that the police found it only because one of them talked during questioning about a different crime entirely. And this is why the case sits on level 5. They were caught, all of them. The evidence was total, the confessions came, nothing about the outcome was in doubt. And because they were legally minors, the machinery of the case ran through a system built to protect children, and it protected the 4 people who had spent 40 days, proving they were no longer anything of the kind. The sentences for one of the worst crimes in modern Japanese history ran as low as a handful of years. Their identities were shielded. They received new lives. At least one of them was arrested again, years later, for violence. The girl has a name, and I am deliberately not saying it because she is famous now for the worst thing that ever happened to her. And she was a person before she was a case. Carry one cold sentence with you to the next entry. Every safeguard in this story faced the wrong direction. And sometimes the system does not fail loudly. Sometimes it just looks away. Japan has a word, johatsu, the evaporated, for people who disappear on purpose. The estimates run to tens of thousands of people every year, walking out of debts, marriages, shame, and simply ceasing to exist on paper. There are night-moving companies that will pack your entire life into an unmarked truck in the dark and relocate you by morning, no questions asked. And the detail that made me build an entire video around them is this: Japan keeps no unified national database for missing adults. If the police decide you left of your own free will, then in most cases, that is where the search ends. A country that can track a parcel to the mine cannot tell you, even roughly, how many of its own citizens have dissolved. Think about where we are on the iceberg. The man on level 4 poisoned 12 people and was never truly found. The girl on this level was failed by the courts. The Johatsu are the third shape of it, the vanished and the unlooked for, and nobody is even counting them. The full video is on my channel if you want to go deeper into that one. Now, level 6. From here down, the victims stop being people and start being places. Level 6. Erasure as policy. In 1938, the Imperial Japanese Army took out its own maps and removed an island from them. Okinoshima, in the inland sea, a short ferry ride off the Hiroshima coast, stopped officially existing while thousands of people worked on it every day. What they made there was poison gas, mustard gas, lewisite, blister agents by the thousands of tons, across the whole war, in defiance of a treaty Japan itself had signed. The workers, many of them students and teenagers, were sworn to secrecy and given almost nothing to protect themselves, and the gas did to them slowly what it was built to do to enemies quickly. Lungs that scarred from the inside, coughs that never left, deaths scattered quietly across the decades that followed, attached to a workplace that did not officially exist. The gas was shipped out and used in China, and when the war ended, the records were burned, and the leftover stock was dumped into the sea and buried in the ground, where some of it is still turning up and still burning people today. Regulars know this island from my War Sites video, because today it is Rabbit Island, covered in tame rabbits and tourists. What I keep coming back to is the maps themselves. Somewhere in an office in 1938, there was a clerk whose actual job that morning was to make an island not exist. He did it with a pen. Level 6 is where the eraser changes hands. Everything above this line was hidden by fear, or shame, or a storyteller's instinct. This island was erased by the state, on paper, deliberately. It was the first place on this iceberg that a government decided you should never find. It was not the last. First, the state erased an island, then it erased people. In 1907, Japan passed a law about a disease, and then used it against them for 90 years. Leprosy, Hansen's disease, was already known to be barely contagious, and by the middle of the century, it was fully curable. The law did not care. Patients were removed from their homes and shipped to island sanatoriums, Nagashima, Oshima, and others, and the removal was designed to be total. Families scratched their names out of the registries. Some patients were sterilized. All of them, in the logic of the law, were already gone. That law stayed on the books until 1996. Not 1896. 1996. In 2001, a court in Kumamoto ruled the entire policy unconstitutional. The Prime Minister apologized, and compensation cases were still being settled in 2019 because some families had hidden their connection to those islands so deeply and for so long that they had to be persuaded it was finally safe to claim what was owed to their own dead. That is the sentence I kept rereading while writing this. Families that had to be persuaded in this century that it was safe to admit their own relatives had existed. I have stood on those islands in an earlier video and shown you what the buildings look like. This is the machinery that filled the buildings. Hold on to it because it is the gentlest version of it you are going to get today. Before I take you to the bottom, do me one quick favor and tap the like button. I am building this channel from nothing, and it pushes these stories in front of people more than you would think. Alright, Level 7. Level 7, there is no legend down here, and this is the part I told you I almost cut. Let me explain why, and then I am going to do my job. In July 1989, behind the Health Ministry's research campus in Toyama, in Shinjuku, a construction crew digging the foundation for a new building broke into a pit of human bones. The remains of at least 35 people, and later analysis suggested more. Skulls with drill holes, bones with saw cuts. The marks, forensic review concluded, of surgical procedures and experimentation made around the time of the Second World War on people who were mostly not Japanese. The pit lay on the former grounds of the Imperial Army Medical College, and the Army Medical College was the administrative heart of a network whose field station in occupied China was called Unit 731. If you have been waiting since the bank in Level 4, yes, this is the unit whose men filled the first Taken suspect list before the investigation settled on a painter. From 1936 to 1945, at a compound in Pingfang, outside Harbin, Unit 731 ran biological warfare research on living human beings. Prisoners, mostly Chinese, also Koreans and Russians, were infected, frozen, and cut open. The staff called them maruta, logs, as in lumber. That was the official term in the paperwork because facility protocol did not allow the subjects to be described as people. That word is the thing I have not been able to put down since I found it. The estimates of how many died inside the compound run to 3,000. And the wider program, the plague and cholera released into Chinese cities and fields, multiplied that number many times over. I am staying at the level of documents on purpose, partly because the documents are the horror, and partly because the survivor testimony goes further than I am willing to take this channel. And the documents continue after the war, because what happened to Unit 731 after 1945 was nothing. The commander, Shiro Ishii, was never tried, neither were his officers. American investigators reviewed the research and wrote, in memos that have since been declassified, that the data was of such value to national security that it outweighed prosecution, because these were experiments no American laboratory could ever have run. So a deal was made. The data crossed the Pacific, and the men who had produced it went home. Some became professors, some ran medical schools. One helped found a major pharmaceutical company. They grew old, respected, decorated, and they died in their beds. And when the bones surfaced in Shinjuku in 1989, about 160 feet, 50 meters from a functioning hospital, the official investigation confirmed roughly what they were, and then went no further. No names, no charges. The remains were placed in a small charnel house near the site, maintained by the ministry, visited by almost no one. Remember what I told you at the Inunaki Tunnel? Japan grows legends over its wounds, like scar tissue. Down here, there is no legend, and now you know why. A legend is a way of talking about something. The bottom of this iceberg was never talked about at all. It has no ghost story, it has a filing system. One thought before you go, the one that followed me out of the edit. The woman in the mask and the bones at the bottom are not two different Japans, they are the same country, processing itself at different depths. A society that cannot say certain things out loud will say them as stories instead. And the heavier the truth, the deeper it gets pushed, until the stories run out, and only the paperwork is left. Every country has an iceberg shaped exactly like this one. Most people just never dive on their own. So tell me in the comments, and mean it, which level was it for you, the moment this stopped being entertainment? I read every comment, and your answer decides how deep the next one goes.